Welcome to Home Games. Why is this called Home Games? Pee-wee's Playhouse was taken, I guess. I don't know. Home Games it is. That is Steve Milton down at the end from the Hamilton Spectator. Bubba O'Neill from CHCH TV Sports. Rick Zamperin from 900 CHML Radio. Good Morning Hamilton Show. Scott Radley, that's me, from the Hamilton Spectator and 900 CHML. And Rick, a few days ago, interesting go-to head-to-head, whatever you want to call it, that got a ton of attention. And that was when Leon Draisaitl of the Edmonton Oilers is up on the podium talking after another loss for the Oilers. And Jim Matheson, Hall of Fame reporter for the Edmonton Journal, challenges him on what's going on. And there's a go-to and a back and forth. And Matheson calls out Draisaitl for his attitude. And Draisaitl, what do you make of this? Is this a thing? Or is this just part of the journalistic, what happens, and we just don't always see it, but it goes on?
Yeah, I think this was, I always like it when reporters challenge athletes and vice versa. When, a reporter asks a question, whether it's a stupid one or not, it could be the most intelligent question ever. And that athlete, expresses their opinion in that point in time, whether they're right and wrong, it's going to be entertaining. But at the end of the day, I don't think we would have had this kind of explosion if we were not in the pandemic and these calls weren't on Zoom. Well, because you would have, I think that you would feel the energy from the person. You might also be able to talk it out afterwards as well, and it may not have mushroom clouded the way it did. But I think having the disinfectant of a Zoom call or a virtual kind of news conference really make everything really cut and dry in terms of the feeling of the question and maybe the body language that wasn't, transferred from reporter to athlete and vice versa. I think, using the word pissy in any question as well will get an athlete going.
You think? Bubba, what do you think?
Well, yeah, the fact that they're calling it Pissygate out there in Edmonton makes me chuckle, because anytime you get these controversies, we somehow affix gate to it. This was a tough one here because you're looking at this lengthy losing streak that the Oilers are going through. And as Rick said, we're going through the pandemic as well, too. So because of the games being postponed, and they've had so many postponements, this 8-game losing streak has actually expanded over a month. So now you're getting the same questions. What can you do to improve? How can you be better as a hockey team? And I'm sure the players are sick of it as well too, and they're on edge. And of course, the media are swirling. They're looking for coaching changes. They're looking for some kind of changes. They're looking for answers. So I think this is just an overall frustration between the players and the media as well too, that I think would really maybe happen anywhere, especially because it's hockey and we're in a Canadian market.
Steve?
I think good on Matty for taking on Draisaitl. You remember what a veteran Jim Matheson is, right? He's been doing this since 1973, guys, and his father was a sports writer as well. So it's kind of in his blood. Now, he did call on that a little bit during the exchange, and I would argue that his choice of words, pissy, was probably not overly appropriate, but that we center on the word rather than what he was trying to get at here, which is, you guys just aren't really facing up to this in front of the public, or at least you're not letting us in a little bit. And it partly relates to what Rick says, the pandemic. You're not standing beside. He couldn't take him aside like he would normally do, say 2 years ago, and say, look, Leon, come on. And that's what all of us here would probably do in a situation like that prior to where we're at. Now, that's never going to be the same again. And I think Matty was taking on also the whole idea of, when this pandemic's over, a lot of this Zoom stuff's still going to happen.
Yep.
We're going to see it in the CFL for sure, because people don't go to the practices.
And it's horrible.
It's horrible because it's vanilla, and everybody's afraid to say anything because they don't want to be kind of shut out because, now the players don't necessarily have to face them in person all the time.
Well, not only that, they always say in these things, and anyone who's watched one, you don't have to have been involved in one. Anyone who's watched one, whether it's the provincial government or whatever else, a question and a follow-up. Well, that does not give you time for nuance or to talk something through or to get a context. Let's say that the player says something and you go, what do you mean by that? Well, is that your follow-up then? And you have something else? If you can stand with someone for 10 minutes and they say something that, may not sound right, and you go, what do you really mean by that? And then they can explain themselves better. you're always going to get better stories. This is this system, the way it's set up right now, Rick. I'm surprised this hasn't happened a whole lot more, quite honestly, because you have to come up with a very direct question and you got one shot at it and you can't nuance it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And even in the old kind of scrum format, say at, old Agawin Stadium, and the bowels of that stadium are all in the dressing room and we're all huddled with, Danny Mack or whoever the player is and asking him a question. Whenever you have a one-on-one to the side with that, whether it's an athlete or a coach, you're always going to ask maybe a more intimate question, get at a detail or get a detail that is that you wouldn't otherwise get in a scrum because of the question and the phrasing that you use. At the end of the day, too, Jim is just doing his job. He's asking the questions that the fans want answers to. And that's what we do in the media business is we're the conduit to our listeners or our readers or our viewers. The questions that they would answer or ask, we are now asking to these athletes and coaches. So I think number one, Matty's just doing his job. Number two, understandable that tensions are high in Edmonton because the team is not playing well. But at the end of the day, we got to be pros and ask the right questions and have those athletes answer them appropriately.
Bubba, have you ever, Bubba, got a good story, a really good story out of a Zoom call or something? Or are all the really good stories that you got from times you've been able to talk with someone and then they tell you something and you talk about it? To me, that's always the way the good stuff comes.
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, because, and I think Milty kind of pointed this out, because anytime you're going to ask a question that's virtually kind of what we would consider on the edge, if we have a response back from the player that maybe, there was confrontation, there was always the ability to sit down and apologize and talk it out and say, hey, I felt like I needed to ask you that question. Anyway, there could always be that coming together, that kumbaya somewhat after that, the player and the media member could come together, but we don't have that with the Zoom. With that said, though, guys, this situation I think is, I don't know if it's different, but we've had these confrontations that have gone on in media rooms as well too. I think of a couple of tete-a-tetes that we could all remember with, like Kent Austin will say, right? I mean, there's sometimes the coaches just doesn't want to deal with it that day, and sometimes us as media members, we don't want the fluff that we're getting. You got to play 60 minutes, and we're trying to get more from the players. So you throw in a long losing streak, and there's going to be tension. I think about times I've been in the Leafs locker room with Mike Babcock and who remember the Ron Wilson era. That was every day there was conflict. So sometimes I just think that the situation sometimes can lead to these questions because as media members, we want to ask the questions that the fan wants to know.
Right. And I think that's one thing that it looked like Jim was sort of standing up only for himself. And he was doing that too, as well. He's not going to, allow himself to get pushed around there, given his status number. But mainly he was doing exactly what you two guys have said, which is fans also want to know why you want to avoid this, like the real sort of self-examination in public. And it's difficult, of course. And Draisaitl, I think probably felt he was standing up for his team as well. They probably mad at the media in general and Jim in particular for things that they've written and why should you be and why wouldn't you be in an 8-game losing streak? I mean, it's just brutal what's going on out there. I mean, it is totally brutal what is going on in Edmonton, given what they have.
But Milty, yeah. But Milty, did the reporter, and I know we all know the individual too and respect him because he's a Hall of Famer, but did the individual, and I'll just speak to him as a reporter, did he cross the line by getting somewhat personal and saying, you're always like that with me? It did in a public sort of Zoom call situation, did he cross the line?
He's not with no fault in this. I think there was something, if he got to do this again, Steve, I think he would probably choose his words differently.
I think he chooses word differently. First of all, I think what he said at first, why are you so pissy? It was only in the second sort of go back and forth with me. Was with me it came up. But yeah, I think you would choose your words. And all of us have done that. We've asked a question awkwardly or quickly or out of our emotion at the time, and because we weren't expecting necessarily to ask that question, and so we've all asked for kind of a redo in our heads, at least. I could have expressed that one a little bit differently, but I think the reaction was over he overreacted here. You know, I mean, if you had to choose one or the other, I'd choose Jim.
There are stories. So this is not just a Zoom phenomenon, just in case anyone's wondering. There are, and we won't mention any names right now, although maybe in the later version of this, there have been spectator reporters in the Ticats dressing room who have been shoved into the drink fridge as a result of a question. And Greg Marshall, when he was coach of the Ticats, gave an excellent breakdown on the word abysmal at 100 decibels to someone based on a question that was out there. These things happen, but I'll say this, and we got to wrap. I'll say this: there is something that we haven't even mentioned, and I know that athletes would blanch at this and say this has nothing to do with it. I think it does. If you are going to be the guy paid $11 million a year, or whatever he's being paid now, there is an expectation. I think that is for your play on the ice, absolutely. But there is a part of that is also your face in front of the cameras and your voice in front of the cameras. And I think if you're taking that money, and good for you for getting it, you have to, you're going to be there and be celebrated when things are going really well. And you have to expect that, you know, I'm also signing up to be the guy in front of the cameras when things are going really badly. And if you don't want that, you know what? There are lots of other lines of work you can take, but I think, you know, even if it's 10 million for your hockey and $1 million for your PR, I think there is a part of that goes into that role.
I wouldn't disagree for sure.
Yeah, totally agree.
What do you think? Now, we're not going to ask you whether you can say whether you side with Draisaitl or Matheson. I mean, it's a very specific case, but should athletes never flash back? Should reporters never push back? Or do you like this kind of thing? Is this the exact kind of thing that you want to see? Do you want to see fights between media and athletes all the time? Because it's highly entertaining. Let us know. You can comment below. You can see our Twitter handles are going to be up in just a second. Take a look at that. You can reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know and stick around. We're going to be doing these. Subscribe to us because we do these all the time. We'll talk to you soon.